So excited for this afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's engagement. We are so excited for our virtual panel discussion today. The title is Archival Praxis, Afro-Futurist and Black Feminist Visions for Cultural Preservation. I'm Jennifer Legia. I'm a Ph.D. candidate in Performance Studies at Northwestern University and a graduate assistant at the Center for Civic Engagements. I'm so honored to be your moderator for the afternoon. I want to give a quick thanks to our sponsors, the Shorefront Legacy Center, which is dedicated to recording, studying, and preserving the experiences of African Americans living in the North Shore. I want to send a shout out to the BMRC, the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, that is really focused on connecting all those who seek to document, share, understand, and preserve Black experiences by promoting the discovery, preservation, and use of Black historical archives. And I want to thank our sponsors, HPP and the Chicago Black Social Culture Map, which is a community-centered initiative developed by Honeypot Performance that traces and preserves Chicago's Black social culture with a focus on house music and dance from the Great Migration to the early 21st century. So today we gather to explore how Black feminist and Afrofuturist archival practices are vital to the ongoing project of building more equitable and liberated futures. Our panel includes distinguished archivists, artists, researchers, educators, performers, and community activists. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation and looking at the intersection of Afrofuturism and Black feminist practice, specifically as archival methodologies that prioritize multiplicity, fluidity, intersectionality, care, and justice. I'm also excited about exploring the ways that these practices challenge traditional methods of archiving. And the hope is that by the end of our time together, we will have a vision for archives as dynamic spaces for storytelling, new possibilities, and the stewardship of collective memory. I'd like to take this time now to introduce our esteemed panelists, each who bring a wealth of experience and unique perspectives to our discussion. So I'll share a brief bio for each panelist, and we can begin. I would like to first introduce Raquel Flores Clemens, who is the head of the Vivian G. Harsh Research Collection. It's the unit of the Archives and Special Collections Division of Chicago Public Library. It's the largest African-American history and literature collection in the Midwest. And in this role, she serves as vice chairperson for the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, an association of libraries, universities, museums, community arts organizations, and other archival institutions. Raquel maintains a deep commitment to capturing historical narratives of communities of color and engages hip-hop as a method of archival praxis. Raquel is passionate about connecting community members and organizing organizers to valuable primary resources and intentional and is intended in ensuring that historical gaps are filled by documenting and amplifying the underrepresented. Laurice Bell considers herself a true Evanstonian. Though born in Chicago, she moved to Evanston at the age of 5. Laurice has produced and directed music videos for musicians such as Miles Davis, Tupac, Selena, Hammer, and NWA. She's used her branding and marketing skills to really build the work of the Shorefront Legacy Center as a historical organization that collects, preserves, and shares stories of Black individuals. Maida McNeil is an artistic and managing director of Honeypot Performance. She received her Ph.D. in Performance Studies at Northwestern, and she is her awards include the Illinois Arts Council Fellowship, the Field Foundation Leaders for a New Chicago, 3 Arts Awards in Dance, as well as the Links Hall Commission's Fellowship. Maida also teaches at the University of Chicago and Columbia College. working with the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events as the Senior Manager of Arts and Community Impact Investment Building. Bethany Hill is an archivist, curator, and Ph.D. candidate in art history, studying Black visual culture and Black feminist spatial practices. Her archival work and research challenges archival absences through the study of Black women, cultural creators as radical spatial thinkers and world builders. Over the last 4 years, Bethany has led multiple curatorial and research projects in the Southside Community Arts Center and other institutions seeking to make their archives, collections, and histories accessible to larger audiences. And finally, Candace Hunter, last but not least, she's a Chicago-based artist and creates collage, paintings, and installations and performance art. Plainly, she tells stories through the use of appropriated materials from magazines, vintage maps, cloth, and various reused materials. And she is known for her Brown Limbed Girl series, which has been featured in New Orleans, Oakland, and on billboards in the south side of Chicago. And prior to this work, she's created installations on women and water rights, on historical injustice, on the works of Octavia Butler, and most recent, Lee Her Butler-inspired work. So I want to welcome the panelists for today.
Thank you.
And so now that we've been introduced, I want to begin our discussion. So I have 2 quotes that I think are a delicious conversation. And I feel like that is going to be a great way to open up. So the first quote is from Diana Taylor, and the text is Archive and Repertoire. And she writes, archival memory works across distance, over time and space. Investigators can go back to re-examine an ancient manuscript, letters to find their addresses through time and space, and computer disks at times can cough up lost files with the right software. Now I'm going to move on to the second quote, and it is from Yvonne Daniels in her text, Dancing Wisdom. And Yvonne writes, in an African diaspora dance perspective, multiple modes of communication are canvassed. Written theoretical communication, in-home manuals, and public libraries, for example, is not privileged, but is weighed with other sources of communication, including nonverbal expressions of the body and the multiple meanings that are found in music, dance. Regardless of the mode in which information is relayed, attention and due respect are given to many channels of communication. Thus, oral histories and time-revered body behaviors count. They are the basis of teaching in all 3 religious systems. And so I want to take a moment to ask everyone, how do you define the archive? How do you approach it? Where does it reside? And who are you in relation to your concept of the archive? And I would love, if possible, to begin with Raquel, who as an archivist, I feel like you can help ground our conversation today in offering an understanding of archives within the field.
Sure. I often try not to go first, but, but since you called me out, I will. So archives are materials, so it can be a collection, a body of materials, but it also can be a space. So the actual space of keeping these archival materials or these different historical primary resources. But archives, in thinking of it in the non-traditional sense, they come from somewhere, and so they are produced from somewhere, and usually from someone or an organization. So the archives itself can be living, and what I like to say is the last part of the cycle of documentation, because it is just like life. A document is conceived, somebody's idea is then birthed through whether writing, capturing that, that idea or that particular memory through photograph or journaling or a memo. And then it has a life cycle and it has different uses. But then we find it becomes archival, if you will, when it comes to a point where it's not in active use anymore. And so archives can be a physical space, a physical thing, but archives very much in the way that I approach it, archives do often are still very much alive and living within people because, you know, there's so many people, especially, you know, thinking about the Black community particularly and how much of our history is still very much being written. So much of our history and those historical narratives are still very much in the minds and hearts of those who've experienced life. You know, right now in the field overall, there is kind of a race to capture those narratives, particularly of the, you know, that great migration generation who are at the end stages of their lives and are, you know, we so desperately need to hear their stories. And so, so that's how you know, how I see archives. And then as an archivist, my role is to collect, preserve, and provide access. And so that's kind of the work of archives. And then that providing the access lends itself to then its activation. So through, you know, encounters by the researcher, and then what that encounter produces through public programming to lift up various narratives and connect them to, you know, contemporary times, or to, you know, to just provide as a resource for the larger community for whatever the work that needs to be done, you know, in our collective community.
And I would like to extend that question to the rest of the panelists. Bethany, can I ask your input on your definition as someone who is kind of in the, I don't want to say the beginning stages of this kind of journey, but kind of exploring and getting into this work yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think that's very, that's totally appropriate. I am very honored and excited to be on a panel with some folks who have been, you know, doing this work for a long time, and and who are role models and have inspired me to kind of find and be really excited about a career in archives. I think I might, I don't know, go back to two of the things that kind of that stood out to me from the quotes that you offered. The first, I found it really interesting in that first quote. What really stood out to me is this, like, the image of and the language around a computer, like, coughing up lost files, you know, the kind of, and thinking about, I think that there's, for me, I feel like my role as an archivist and something I'm really interested in is kind of how we can challenge and push back against the idea of loss, that the kind of, you know, that there's, you know, that coughing up, it wasn't lost, like it was, you know, it's just this, the kind of, the role of bringing, of excavating or kind of bringing visibility to, or aggregating stories, experiences, narratives that, you know, like that are there and that have been there, but to point towards that second quote you offered, you know, that there's still so much, there's still very limited kind of ways that we prioritize what, you know, gets to count as an archive, what should count as an archive, who gets recognized as knowledge producers, right? That it's, you know, really, I think about trying to really critique what knowledge production looks like. And yeah, I think that it's, for me, that kind of the Black feminist politics or kind of approach to archiving, for me, is really grounded in thinking about the many unexpected places in which Black women and minoritarian subjects are producing knowledge and theory, and inevitably that the intersection between action, between pragmatic action and theory is just always, is inextricably linked and inseparable from one another.
Thank you for that. Larice, we had a chance to speak as well about your perspective, your particular grounded framework, your approach to the work that you're doing at Shorefront. And I'd love to hear how you define the archive.
Well, first, there are pieces that everyone has said, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's it. We have been around for 25 years at Shorefront specifically, but one of the things about talking about there being a race, I liken it to like a 5-alarm fire with so many of our folks getting older and so many who aren't here. But I think instead of, I think about our history, and I think that it's been written. I just think that people haven't considered us as archival when everything we do is archival, and it is built this space and most of the spaces that we inhabit and others inhabit. But I think that it's about archiving for me is not about putting things into boxes. It's about bringing things out of boxes. It's about making sure that more people see and hear and understand the effects that we've had. I think of the archival work, whether I'm on my own or in a group of people, as a community act, and I see the collections as items, as almost as people that speak to me. And a lot of these voices are not voices that have been heard. We can speak and name those who are famous, but I think that there needs to be a reconsideration of what important looks like. I'm working on a couple of projects. I'll give you a short piece that just kind of explains this. And there's a project of women in history, and I finally got the list, and there were some Black people and some white people, but there were no others included. And someone said, well, if you're recognized, why does it matter if others are not? And I think that's often the way that we've thought of archives, as if we see ourselves, then that's enough. And frankly, we don't see ourselves enough, but we must also open the doors. And we also, one of the things that was said to me, well, it has to be historical, so it has to be something people who lived at least 70 years ago. And I said, I would call that gatekeeping, frankly. So I think we need to reconsider when we think of who is important and whose stories and lives we collect, so that we make that tapestry that we've missed so much of. I'm never sure if I've answered the question, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I do agree. There's a work toward identifying value, definitely identifying value in voice. I am very much interested in getting Maida McNeil's perspective and definition on the archive, particularly within the work of the Chicago Black Social Culture Map and the work that Honeypot Performance shapes. I'd love to hear how you define the archive.
Yep. Good afternoon. Loving the layers and intersections of things I'm hearing already. I think, I and my co-collaborators with Honeypot Performance, I think we really approach archival work through the body, through memory, through performance, through what lives in the body and is stored in the body. And I think of it as that primarily we have come through it through our work as makers of performance, right? And that even the ways that we make our performance work, that there is always a period of kind of story collection and creation together amongst us, but then amongst other communities that we draw in. And so, you know, we are kind of mining the collective archive of whatever it is, whatever the thematic is that we're working on, to kind of find the points of knowledge production and where power lives or is in tension with other things, and ways that voices are fighting to be heard or to be seen, made visible, and to have agency. So I think a lot of that is happening in all the work we make. And then that filtered into the Chicago Black Social Culture Map, which started out of a performance project that was thinking about house music in Chicago, originating in Chicago, but also being connected to other Black social practices across the 20th century, across these waves of the Great Migration, and how that we could hear and see and feel in the architecture of a party, or the sound of the music, or even the practices of DJs, right? That this older history is stored, and to kind of unpack that through a mapping of where houses lived, right? And then what it is connected to. So I think for us, it is really, and you know, and then that it has also been like a labor of love. I think part of archival practice, especially for Black folks of color, is really about love, and about, you know, we want to tell the stories and hold the stories and uplift the stories of folks that we know are, and practices we know are certainly of value, but haven't been forefronted. And so I think the work continued as this labor of love, from the performance to kind of strength to strength. You know, it just continued to grow, and there were more stories, more dimensions, and now it continues to unfold. It is a digital archive project, but it is also now live programming, and we've added an archive manager who does some one-on-one sessions and things like that. So it is also this constant unfolding.
It's almost a practice, an
So
actual.
I would say it's like a collective stewardship,
Mhm.
you know, of storytelling
Absolutely.
and knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you. I would love to hear from Candace Hunter and your particular approach to archives, specifically within the realm of visual arts.
So hello, everyone. Great to be here with you and listening to everyone in a very formal understanding of what the archive is. As an artist, because I do research on a lot of my work before I start anything, for a very long time, in fact, but I've never considered myself an archivist or really delved into what the archive is. But howsoever, right now, working on a project called 50,831 Dreams. It is based on a childhood memory. And so to flush out that memory, I am trying to find people who still have firsthand knowledge. So talking about a 5-alarm fire, this is it right now, because people who are the age that I am or older have lost parents already. Our friends have lost parents already. So there's some information that will be lost, but then there's a lot more to be recovered. And so one of the things that I'm approaching it two ways. I'm doing very casual conversations. I'm also doing teas that will be in my studio. There will be 3 over the summer where I'm inviting very specific kinds of groups of people in to have conversations. But the casual conversation is if I'm saying hello to you and we're not the best of friends, but we're friendly, or you're friends with a friend and you're my age. I'm not going to tell you guys how old I am though, so don't ask. I go, are you a Chicagoan? Are you a lifelong Chicagoan? Were your parents lifelong Chicagoans? Were your grandparents lifelong Chicagoans? Because then I can place them whether they're the first part of the migration or if they were the second large wave of the migration. And I can have some kind of understanding about where they fit. Case in point, 2 wonderful women were in my studio last week. They were not there for a studio visit. They were just walking through the Hyde Park Art Center, saw that I had a studio and said, one of them said, hey, this is Candace Hunter's space. So they came in, I welcomed them. And of course I asked one, I said, I know that you're a Chicagoan, but your friend, excuse me, and I didn't remember her name. Are you a Chicagoan? And so she says, yes, although I live in Slidell, Louisiana now. And I said, that still works. It's a direct line back and forth. So I asked them about my memory. And my memory was of a very little girl driving down State Street with my father. And there was a wall of doors that went from 63rd to 65th on the west side of the street. As a little child, these doors were fascinating to me. They were pink and blue and natural colored wood. Some had writing. And I imagined that there were very narrow homes behind each door. Or I imagined on the pink door that maybe there was a lady who had pink hair who came out and greeted you. So my imagination as a little girl was vast on this wall of doors. It wasn't until I became much older that I discovered that that wall of doors was literally the barrier to hide the detritus of the homes and businesses that were stolen from African Americans in the build of the Dan Ryan Expressway. If you let it be seen all the time, there would certainly be public outcry, but because it was hidden away, there wasn't as much, except for individuals who were being affected. And so I asked people the question, are you Chicagoan? Do you have a memory of those doors? And the woman I didn't know said, I don't remember the doors, but I remember my dad having to drive far north on State Street to then cross west because of this gaping hole that they were building the Dan Ryan. And I said to my dad, Daddy, but where did the people go? And her father looked at her and said, I don't know, Denise. I don't know. So in this project that I'm doing, I'm going to find where some of those people went, how their dreams were transmorphed into new dreams, because just because something is done to us does not mean that we don't continue to dream and make new dreams. And so how did those dreams change and what did we create from that moment in time? So I'm doing formal conversations and memory mining with people, as well as this very casual kind of conversation as I meet up with folks. So that's it.
That is, and there are 2 comments that kind of reflect what I was thinking, you know, this appreciation for the tea gathering as a way of storytelling, as a way of communing. I mean, that's a beautiful, beautiful way to gather stories and, you know, again, create value in the everyday, And second, this memory that you spurred, this visual of these doors, again, for me, highlighting the different places that archives kind of can exist, knowing and unknowingly, even on the stretch of a street, right? So this is such a beautiful way to look at the memories in our lives. I want to move on to the Black feminist practice that can be vital in the work of archiving at this time. So I have another quote here from Marika Sifor and Stephanie Wood in the text Critical Feminism in the Archive. And they write, within the archival field, engagements with feminist thought and practice have too often been focused narrowly on documenting more women in archives, rather than adopting the critical feminist agenda of dismantling the heteronormative, capitalist, racist patriarchy. And so, that's what I am excited about, is that, Black feminist praxis mobilizes, in addition to ideas of intersectionality and the impact of multiple structures of power, racism and sexism. And, not only, again, in addition to intersectionality, but the use of voice and care to neutralize these imbalances. And that's definitely been a theme in some of the definitions of archives that I'm hearing right now. I would love for everyone to share how you activate or where you see Black feminist practice being activated and mobilized in your archival work. And we can popcorn it around.
I'll start. It's just, that's at the backbone of who we are as an organization, right? So I feel like we build around those processes and practices and values of a kind of Black feminist framework, thinking about how we make space, quite literally, for Black women in a diverse spectrum of what that actually represents. But then how we also take the experiences and the challenges that Black women have historically experienced, right? And think about how we draw on that to kind of push back on the world, to kind of create the world we want to see, by rehearsing that in the ways that we interact together, the way that we build our own creative practices, and kind of the ways we honor each other with respect, and create space inside of when we're making creative work. And that has also transferred, I think, into the ways that we now do the archival work more formally with the Chicago Black Social Culture Map. And that we are really all very conscious of who gets, who are we presenting in any of our programs, and making sure that there is both a range, that it is not male-centered, which around house music, you can certainly lean that way, but to think about the places where these other presences and influences and change makers have been inside of that culture, and to also forefront that. So to me, those are all elements of a Black feminist praxis embodied in that work.
You mentioned, Maida, that's what we do. I've seen Nikki Giovanni speak a number of times, and she was talking about Black women and how when we all go to Mars, Black women are going to be on Mars, and we're going to be feeding those babies and taking care of those babies because that's what Black women have done for so long, right? And that care aspect. But When I think again about the 5-alarm fire, and collecting lives and histories that have not been paid attention to, that have been ignored intentionally. I think about when I'm talking to people about their experiences and having a true interest and a deep interest, but there's also that piece in collecting that relationships take time. And so whether or not we've been put in this position where we are trying to make up for hundreds of years of time where we haven't been heard or listened to, that there is the need to slow down and build a relationship and respect all of those stories. And the idea of missing them might be painful, but the necessity to get to know and to respect people who often haven't been respected. I mean, we just did interviewed some people, and we were trying to find some women, and we were having a hard time. And that's because, you know, so often it's hard to find us, but then it's harder to find us when someone's changed a name on marriage or a second marriage. So, you know, we get lost in so many ways, and the work is so detailed and deep in order to find people. And, you know, then there are people who, you know, once we open this up, and then what? So when we speak about history, when we speak about experiences, how do we collect these pieces and leave people whole and okay? And I run into a question, so it's a question I'm going to ask, is that, I mean, I feel it's my responsibility, but what is the responsibility when we're building and we're collecting and we're learning to those that we're learning from?
I may answer that question, or that you asked me specifically to answer that question, but I would like to kind of continue in the vein of the discussion around building relationships. I think that what is may not be very apparent to all who engage in this work, and particularly those who are not in this identity of being Black or being woman or being both, but the work of archives in the traditional sense, so in, you know, like established institutions, your colleges, your universities, your, you know, your libraries, museums, and such. When you think about the way in which those collections got there or they were developed, you tease out a very colonialistic practice where those collections were built by going into a community and then taking out. And oftentimes to the detriment of the community, because it's a removal of intentionally built knowledge that also supported the community economic growth, social strengthening, and the like. And there's not any reciprocity or a benefit. And sometimes that can develop even more strain between, you know, an institution that may have, you know, grown and overtaken a community, and that community is not, you know, receiving any benefit. Case in point, you know, universities locally here, you know, in their growth have displaced communities, displaced businesses and such, and felt it was important to capture their history by collecting things or what have you, but there was nothing given back to that, you know, to that community. And in some cases, the community didn't want it because they recognized the practice. And so I don't take for granted that if I, particularly in the work that I do, because I'm very intentional about, you know, preserving Black history, I don't go into a space that's predominantly Black and just lean on my, you know, on my identity as a Black woman. I recognize what, you know, I try to go in and recognize how am I showing up and for who. So if I'm showing up, you know, representing my organization, then I have to recognize in the privilege that has and be willing to relinquish it in order to build relationships, and to also acknowledge and lift up the knowledge that's already in the community and be willing to co-pilot with community members and to identify whether or not it's appropriate for materials to come into the collection. And if it is not, how can I be a resource to the community for them to do their own collecting of materials, telling their own stories, preserving their own history. And that's where I think the Black feminist methodologies come in and dismantle the oppressive and colonialistic practice that's very ingrained in archives. Many archival institutions, they may have a drop or a snippet of, communities of colors represented in their history. In this space, the voices of Black history will be more prioritized just because of the intentionality of our work. But when we leave this group and go into certain spaces, we are a drop in the bucket of these larger collections in these organizations. So, when I made the comment even earlier, while a lot of history about Black people have been written already, it's still very much being written, because we also got to realize how established institutions have played a significant role in silencing voices. And even how sometimes white supremacy shows up even in Black spaces in telling stories and what narratives get left out and not told, and are just starting to see the light of day and being ready because people show up in spaces and try to break open whatever that barrier was to allow for resources to use to tell stories or to collect them. So that has been one way that I've shown up in this work and have used the legacy and being in the lineage of Black people, and particularly Black women, and showing up to this work very differently, and being very much people-centered and people-focused, and not necessarily coming to a space saying, I know all the things, I know what needs to be done. It's a matter of having a conversation with community and showing up and saying, how can I be a supporter or a resource, even if that doesn't necessarily mean that your materials come into this space. Just because I represent an organization, a difference of thinking is it doesn't necessarily mean it belongs here. So let me come alongside you in whatever expertise I have, and we partner with your expertise, and that's another thing too. Just because you don't have a degree or that you're not credentialed does not mean that you're not an expert. You're an expert of your own experience, of your community, of your life, and there's value there, because that's how these collections are being produced and started, through the work and the production of individual people.
I really am thankful for the ways that I am hearing the care being taken, not only the care for individual voices, but the taking care with relationships and one's particular relationship to others, and the stories and these objects, these memories that we create value through. Bethany, you were going to say a few words as well.
Yeah, I was gonna I think that what Laurice said and what Raquel said, especially for me, tied together so beautifully in thinking about how do you show up individually, kind of as how do you navigate the ways that you show up as an individual, and how do you kind of the need to be always cognizant of and careful and critical of how institutional relationships or institutional structures can be have systematic tendencies to be extractive, and how radical slowness is, like slowness in archival work, and slowness as a practice of care, slowness as something that is confrontational to white capitalist patriarchal systems, and how the need to be very, very intentional with what visibility means and the stakes of visibility, right? That I think it's so much more nuanced, and really, I think, as someone in archival work, that it's never a straightforward, easy answer, and I think always is a question, and something that needs to be moved through, with that thinking of what does reciprocity look like, what does reciprocity look like for the goal of, how does reciprocity leads towards liberation? How are those intimately connected? And I think that was, I really appreciate, what you said, Raquel, too, about, that just because, that I can walk into a space as a Black woman, and that does not automatically mean that, or doesn't automatically mean that I don't have to think with, respect and care for how I relate and share and hold space with people and their stories. And the way that co-collaborating and co-designing and co-envisioning is really, it's slow work in beautiful ways, and I think has to be.
And Candace, I'd love to ask where feminist praxis and Black feminist work resides in your practice and in your work.
So I think that I'm probably the eldest in the room right now. And because I've been outside of academia for a very long time, and I sit alone and create alone, there's some words that I don't use, that are not a part of my daily conversation. In fact, and I'm trying to be a younger, better girl now than I have been in the past. And understanding that when I was younger, Black women did not say they were feminist because that meant those other people. We were other things. We were womanists. We were freedom warriors. We were sister soldiers, but we didn't say we were feminists. And so I still have a little hard time with saying that, but I'm absolutely a womanist. I thank God I had a mother who grew up in the time when social clubs were still the rage. So my mother was part of the Chatterettes and the Jonquils and her sorority, and she was surrounded by incredible, intelligent, talented, creative, giving Black women. And so those were all of my aunties. Those were the women I knew. These were women who were the bacillus for sororities. These were the women who wrote books on every Black school in the city of Chicago. Cordia Miller, she did, so these were Dr. Margaret Burroughs. All of these girls were my mother's friends, and I was one of the club kids. So I've always been surrounded by that kind of womanhood, Black womanhood, Black sisterhood. And so I think that in honoring them, I continue to do the work that they started doing. And so my work is visual. It's not archival, although I use archives. It is not academic work. It is visual work. But in my visual work, I am at all times honoring those who came before me and those who are going to come after me. So I'm always putting that in the forefront of what I'm thinking about and what I want to do. Not for a moment am I not considering Black womanhood. It does not happen. It is a part of my breath and my everyday. Did that help, Jennifer?
Very much. Very much so. Very much so. And, you know, it helps. Oh, go ahead, please continue.
Just really quick. I'm so appreciative of the comment that that Candace made. I also just giving stuff. I feel weird calling Candace. I really want to say Miss Hunter.
Don't call me Candace, or I can't.
But okay. But I really appreciate you bringing up like your experience as a young woman, and then what the word feminist meant to you at the time and in real time in that context. And it reminded me of the Combahee River collective statement, where they were very intentional of making that distinction as well, although they, very much stood in, the identity of Black feminists. But one thing that they said that really kind of made them, many things, but that made them different, is that they saw feminism as a way of completely excluding men. And they were very much intentional, saying, no, we will work alongside of Black men. We are not going to exclude them, but we also will deal with them on the ways in which they also, inflict, harmful sexist, activities and ideologies as well. And so I just really appreciate that, because it just brings to bear more how this work is, at least in the way that I've tried to practice, and the intention within other sisters in the stacks, folks who identify as Black and woman, or in just really here for our people. It really is an intentional effort of being in community to do this work and to collect the stories of everyone across the spectrum, the gender spectrum, the socioeconomic spectrum in our community. So I just really wanted to kind of lift that up, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And, it really highlights the way that, Bethany, you were talking about this idea of slowness. And so it highlights the way that meaning can change over time as well. And this is a beautiful way to engage with this idea of temporality. And I want to talk about this idea of like Afrofuturist approaches. And I want to bring in this quote from Yatasha Womack, author of Afrofuturism, The Worlds of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture, fellow Chicagoan. Who approaches Afrofuturists in this way. She says, Afrofuturism as a discourse of resistance, not just the novel combination of elements of science fiction, historical fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, Afrocentricity, and the magical realism within non-Western beliefs, but also the critical and artistic intersection of imagination, technology, the future, and liberation. And so with this, I would love to ask how everyone engages with the intersections of race, gender, power, and temporality, and specifically futurity within your practice. Oh, Candace, you're muted.
Can I be heard now? Yes. Um, so the idea of Afrofuturism has come up and to me a great deal because I often do work based on Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler was a speculative fiction, science fiction writer who is often thrown into the camp of Afrofuturism. I might say after her passing. I'm not sure that she would sit well there. I think that she would have a little discourse about that. But because I do work based on Octavia, then the question of Afrofuturism is always brought to me in the work that I do. And what I like to say is that I understand that time is a continuum and that past is future, future is present, and we're all going around the same circle. So if we want to talk about liberation and freedom, in the past, we were free. In the future, we will be free. And in the present, wherever your heart and mind is, you can be free. And so it's a continual circle of who we are, who we were, who we can be, and who we take along with us. That's it.
I love it.
Thank you, Larissa.
When you brought up the idea of womanist, I mean, that's how I grew up as well. And so I remember going to marches and everything was about a feminist. And it was so difficult for me. It was so difficult for me to find some peace and to feel like I belonged in a space that had often not included me or us. So, talking about the future, what will be, what is, and, using, putting the Afro in the front of the futurism and the feminism, does that, I'm still working on it.
Yeah, I'll just say that, like, again, the future for us, I think, and when I say us, I'm going to be always referencing my co-collaborators, right, who I make and build with and vision with. But I think that it is in that place of creativity that we are, like, always imagining the future, right? We are always, as Candace said, like, we are always referencing these temporalities at the same time of past and present, but always in the service of, like, what do we want to be? And how do we enact that right now in all of the things that we do and the things that we make and build, that those are the steps, the building blocks towards getting to that place. Utopia, whatever you want to call it, the promised land, for us, like, the place where we feel the most empowered and able to walk into into our power and see our community walking into its power. And I think we imagine those things, we conceive those things in the place of play and making and doing that with other people, which creates dialogue, which creates new curiosities, which creates, like, that extends that circle of making and envisioning and thinking about what we can and should be, will be. So, yes.
I want to offer a quote that I think ties what everyone has said together really beautifully. This is from Robin D.G. Kelly's Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination. He writes, "Too often our standards for evaluating social movements pivot around whether or not they succeed in realizing their visions rather than on the merits or power of the visions themselves. By such a measure, virtually every radical movement failed because the basic power relations they sought to change remained pretty much intact. And yet it is precisely these alternative visions and dreams that inspire new generations to struggle for change. And that felt like a really poignant quote for me too, in thinking about how, this question about how is archival work futurist? And I think that, inherently the kind of, like that quote said, that the value and the merit, the radicalness of the visions themselves is essential to the kind of continuing to think and dream about what about what liberation today and in the future looks like. And so I think the kind of, for me, it feels like a really powerful thing to be able to kind of spend time and be with historical materials in exactly that way, in celebrating their merit and their value as is, and and being adamant that they are essential for thinking about what needs to change and what needs to continue to change.
Raquel, it seems as though it's hard to hear you.
I'm doing two different technology things. I'm connected through my phone with my my earpiece, and it was still muted. I appreciate that quote, Bethany, because it ties into something that I was thinking, as I was, thinking about the question. Archive is innately futurist because you don't, capture a moment in time, take a photograph, journal something, unless there's this, even if it's unspoken or unexpressed in some way, the intention is for someone at some point to encounter it, to read it, to remember. And so what's really important about the idea of Afrofuturist is when we as a people globally have encountered various systems of oppression and in many ways had intentions to keep us subjugated or to kill us. Like let's be like, I'm very and that may seem bleak, but you do this work enough when you see materials, you see things, you encounter history, like folks just want to kill us. And so the fact that and the fact we are still engaging with these systems of oppression that actually kill us, right? And the fact that anyone in these moments and times and in various circumstances still do something to be remembered is radical. Because even if it's not articulated in the way that I'm articulated, in some measure, there's a belief that someone in my bloodline or my family or my community is going to encounter this moment in time, going to know about this and do something to remember it. Even if it's a political movement that fails, even if it's a business that fails, that has the intentions to bolster the community and support economic growth and the like, there's still and it's not just Black people. This is innately human. But if you look at history and how prior to the last 20 or 30 years, because we really really what it is and why it's important to really engage this topic from the perspective Afrofuturism and thinking about Black history and collections that tell these stories, is that a lot of our history was told by others. A lot of our history was told from a different lens. And really you feel the last 20 or 30 years is not the only moment in time. Really the last 20, 30 years has been a lot of work that has been done to correct it. We're never going to get the full measure of history. It's too many players, right? It's too many people involved. But what we do know is that for a very long time, voices of Black people and other communities of color were largely excluded. And so you have many historians and folks that are doing this work you know, whether however they're activating historical materials, whether it's through research or writing, whether it's through performance, whether it's through creating, you know, visual works, a lot of times it's in this vein of correcting history. And so it's important to, you know, in my work as, you know, an archivist, really trying to collect histories and stories from folks who may not have a prominent name, who may not be like, you know, who's who in, you know, in whatever space, but they are doing very important work to, you know, in their community. And so the work of collecting stories about Black people and their lives is radical and inherently futurist, because it's like it's staking the claim that we're going to be here regardless. We're going to be here, and this work is to strengthen the cause, whatever that cause is, for us to be lifted up. I hope I answered the question. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yes, and so beautifully as well. These conversations are so rich with content and so rich with the possibilities. I know that our audience is probably curious as well and probably has a few questions. So I do want to take this time. We've got a few more minutes, probably maybe about 10, 15 minutes to take questions from the audience. As well, if there are no questions, I do want to take this time to invite the audience to share in the chat any words that have come up, any words or any phrases that have emerged for you while listening, just so that we can create even our own archive of today's event and the ideas that have come up from our panelists. So 2 things: I'm welcoming any questions from the audience, as well welcoming into the chat any words, phrases, thoughts, ideas that came up for you. In the meantime, we have a question from Kim Ruffin.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer, and all of the panelists today. This has really been an invigorating discussion, and I really appreciate all of your perspectives. And I wanted to direct specific thanks to Raquel Flores Clemens for working at the Vivian G. Harsh collection. My aunt was able to keep our family connection to an ancestor who participated in the WPA narrative, former slave narrative collections, thanks to the archives at the Vivian G. Harsh collection. And so thank you for continuing the work of that very important institution. And I wanted to ask all of you, or those of you who work with what I would call maybe like problematic archives. So archives, records of African-American history that were collected in ways that we wouldn't endorse today. What do you think we can do when you can tell that the interviewer was racist, or you could tell when the interviewers didn't have respect for their subjects? I'm curious if you all have any recommendations about how we read those materials, and I'll leave it at that.
I can, and anyone can answer. I can just speak really quickly. So 2 things. I wear this hat, you know, as the head of the Harsh Research Collection, so I represent this organization, and then I also do work outside of that role with a collective of archivists where we prioritize Black cultural heritage and memory work. And so I wanted to bring those 2 distinctions in the way in which I operate in my role as an archivist. Because that work, you know, in this, the collective is called the Blackivist. And so a lot of the impetus for developing the Blackivist was realizing the limitations that are in place, you know, working in an institution, right? Because the idea is, you know, even if your role is to collect specifically around Black history, there's still limitations. You know, there's still, you know, agendas of the organization that you often have to prioritize, and sometimes prioritize them over what you may identify as a need of the community that they may benefit more by maybe either having the materials stay in the community or some other way. And so to answer your question specifically, when many archives, no matter what they're collecting, they have problematic collections. Like it does, whether it's a collection focused on someone's experience who's a part of the Black community or somewhere else. Like it's so many issues. Like you'll find that maybe in the way finding guides, which is a document that identifies what the collection is and what's in the collection, that sort of thing. If it was written by somebody many decades ago, way before we have come to a what I like to think a better social enlightenment in the way in which we use language to describe people, you will find that even in the way that's written, it can be problematic. And even in the way in which they may describe a recording that has a racist interview or what have you, even the way they describe it and in their way of trying to be accurate and true to the moment, so they want to describe it that way, but not realizing you can be a human in this role. And this is a profession that people really come against. The whole archives are not biased. And that's another way in which, many folks like myself are coming against it because, no, it's already biased. And so we're going to lean on our own experiences and in the practice of care and how we preserve these records and how we write about them. And so one thing that I do and that even this institution that I'm in does, and then in other organizations, you'll see having statements to kind of let the public know, these are materials that are here. They have been collected over time, many before in which the current, makeup of the organization, was a part of it. And just having some type of statement, many organizations do that to identify, yes, there is materials in here that you will hear racist language, you will hear, this language that express discriminatory practices, and making that know that it's present and is here, and by having a statement there, this is a way of trying to correct. And then if that organization is doing the work to try to really repair, because reparative work is a huge thing in this field right now, repairing cataloging records, repairing finding guides, repairing any descriptions of materials that have problematic language. That will also be included in those type of statements. Some statements are more detailed or descriptive than others, but that is one way, and that is one approach. Especially when it comes to sometimes folks may assume that oh, your archivist is a particular repository, everything. That is not the case. It's just not enough time or space or energy to know everything. There really is that is something that you build a knowledge of over years and how much you encounter a particular collection of history. So sometimes you may not know that something that's problematic exists in a collection. On the flip too, there's other ways in which problems present themselves in the collection. And then I may be getting technical, and this is where the professional practice piece comes in about understanding what we call deed of gifts and how these collections come into organizations or how they are developed and formed. And so sometimes someone's history may have been seen as problematic at a point in the past, and that person may not have had the foresight to believe that things would change. And so it may be parts of someone's history that they did not want shared. And so that may have been expressed in a deed of gift where an institution will be bound to that. And so may not be able to provide access to those records, those sort of things. And so, and on the flip, for things that are just clearly problematic, and a lot has to do with the way in which deeds of gifts were done in the past. But recently there is this great effort to make sure that whatever you deposit, that it will be fully accessible. And then we identify those things, just try to let the public know as best as you can. I hope that was helpful.
I think we have time for one more brief question. if there aren't any further questions, I did have one more brief quote. This is from Laura Gilman and her text, Unassimilable Feminism. And there she writes, I strive to cultivate a politics of recognition that rather than of inclusion. So again, I strive to cultivate a politic of recognition rather than of inclusion. I further labor to facilitate a politics of influence by indicating how womanists and mestiza feminists have used and can use their theory-mediated schemas to foster constructive paradigms that will disseminate their values, modes of consciousness, and politics into public arenas. And I really believe that that occurred today. I believe today was an opportunity to share a particular way of engaging with the world that centers womanist and feminist perspective, that center the work of Black women, and that really focused on the future. So again, I want to thank each and every one of our wonderful panelists. Please share in a round of applause. You can kind of clap for everyone. I want to thank everyone for their wisdom, their insights, their experiences, and sharing their time with us today. Everyone's contributions have been extremely invaluable in really helping to understand the vital role of archival work in our worlds. Continue to support our sponsors for today. Please continue to follow the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. Please follow the Shorefront Legacy Center and the Chicago Black Social Culture Map, supported and organized by Honeypot Performance and the Southside Community Arts Center. Thank you so much. And with that, everyone have a beautiful day.
Thank you, Legia, for such a beautiful moderation.
Thank you
Yes,
all.
thank you.
Everyone, have a
Really
beautiful
beautiful.
day.
Glad to be a part of it.
Thank you so, so much. And while everyone's logging off, I think I'm just going to read some words that came up. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Activation, engagement, value, embodied, love, support, power, reparative, the stakes of visibility, doors, slowness, firsthand knowers. Thank you all so much.